Hello, everyone. Um, I'm Becca Cantor, as you might know, Jewish Book Council's editorial director, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this year's second and final meeting of Paper Brigade Short Story Club. It's great to see some of you who've joined us before, and I'm delighted to see some new faces here too. So welcome to you all. As you might know, Paper Brigade is Jewish Book Council's annual literary journal. It celebrates the breadth and diversity of Jewish books today through a mix of articles, interviews, fiction, poetry, and artwork. At each meeting of our short story club, we discuss a work of fiction published in the journal together with its author, and today we're delighted to be joined by Adam Schorin, the author of Holograms. I'm also joined by Paper Brigade's fiction editor, Josh Rolnick, and executive editor, Carol Kaufman. The three of us are going to kick off the first half of today's meeting with some questions for Adam, and then for the second half, we'll invite you to jump in. If you'd like to ask a question, and we would love to have you do so, please just write it in the chat. On the top right of your screen, you have the option of viewing the discussion in gallery or speaker mode, and I suggest switching to speaker mode if you haven't already done so. Adam's story appears in the 2024 issue of Paper Brigade, our current issue. We're posting a link to purchase this issue in the chat, and just until midnight tonight, we're offering you $5 off with the code SHORTSTORY24. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Adam Schorin, the author of Holograms. Adam is a writer based in Warsaw, although he's currently zooming in from Paris. His short fiction and nonfiction have been published in Zizova and The Forward, among other publications. He is writing and producing a documentary directed by Michel Franco to be released next year. So, welcome, Adam. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you for being here. I can't wait. As you know, I absolutely love this story, Holograms, and I can't wait to discuss it with you. And I wonder if you could just start out by giving us a quick summary of Holograms in your own words.
Yeah, sure. It's about a group of young drag performers in Berlin who go to an exhibition in which Holocaust survivors have been pre-recorded answering, a few thousand questions, and they're on display as holograms, which is a real thing, a real exhibition. And the audience, engage with them, ask them questions, and the recordings respond. And the narrator, Sammy, who's an American Jew and the only Jew in the group of performers, feels very out of place and also really has to pee the whole time and eventually runs to the bathroom.
That is perfect. And I actually love how these holograms are described. And as you point out, they are real. This is a real thing that you've written about. I wonder if you could just read us so we can hear Sammy's first encounter with a hologram.
Sure. So I'm going to read from my phone. Sorry.
No worries.
It was an old man, though not as old as I had been prepared for, in a green button-down felt vest and slacks. Glasses hung from a knotted string around his neck. There was something in how he had been filmed that made every part of him appear equally in focus in a way that people in real life are not. His entire figure was limned by a shimmery half-centimeter like the curdled air over a sweltering freeway. When he finished speaking, he flickered as he shifted back to his resting pose. The promo video had explained that the footage was lightly animated, the survivors' gestures augmented by CGI, so that different clips could be seamlessly cut together. But it gave the impression of a cartoon scientist being electrocuted, the boundaries of his figure rapidly realigning. What's the worst thing that happened to you? This from an Irishman in an Orlando Magic jersey. The woman with him punched his arm. Some Simon Ausfelder shuddered into a hunched pose, the electricity again, and rubbed his forehead. The worst thing? Every day you thought was the worst you ever lived, but always the next one proved you wrong. Our only privacy was in the latrines. We sat on holes in a long bench. It was disgusting, but the guards did not watch, so we were a little free. My bladder pinched my abdomen. Just go, Maurice whispered. We'll still be here. I was surprised he could tell. It's fine, I said. I can wait. I leaned forward, easing the pressure of my piss. An older woman was standing at the mic. She said, Are you real? Simon Ausfelder spread his arms wide. I am a real person, he announced, and the tourists beside me clapped. This meant, of course, that the lab coat people had thought to prepare the survivors for this. One of the 2,000 questions they had asked was simply, Are you real? Simon Ausfelder seemed calm. His gentle bobbing smile held the attention of the crowd. It was the same poise Ray and Fabula brought to the stage that I hoped one day to project as well. Light and welcoming, confident but innocuous. I tried to mirror his smile, but on my lips it felt gimmicky, like I had drawn it in clown paint. The faces around me, now that the applause had settled, were solemn, expectant. I buried my underwhelming smile, lest they think I was having fun.
Thank you so much, Adam. One of the things that just really strikes me, oh, and applause, of course. Thank you for this from the audience. One of the things that just really strikes me about this passage and actually the story in general is your juxtaposition of things that we might consider to be sacred, like Holocaust remembrance, this beautiful, immaculate museum, and then things that are mundane, like Sammy needs to pee, and the museum visitors are like heckling the holograms, and it's very sort of the details in life that are very normal to us all. And there's such dark humor in those moments, which I really appreciate. And I wonder if you could talk about how you thought about creating those, and also what does that dark humor kind of show about Holocaust remembrance today?
Sure. I think about the sacred and the profane. I think we have a tendency to treat Holocaust survivors with such reverence that we like that makes them almost untouchable, almost godlike, and it's out of a desire to be respectful, but it erases them as humans. Then they can't be human beings. They're these untouchable, immaculate stories, and there's a guy I know in Krakow who in his 50s, who's very involved in Jewish life and Jewish culture. He's not Jewish, but he talks about studying the Holocaust and in university, and like, feeling like he was walking around the city with just this like heavy sense of everything happened here, and if I ever meet a survivor, like what will I say to them? And they're so overwhelming and etc. And um, then he met my grandfather at something, and he was like, came over, and he's like, "Sir, I've like seen your photographs, and I've read about you." And my grandfather immediately started telling, um, like jokes about like he was like, "Oh, did you know so and so, this other survivor? She was sleeping with this guy when they were like teenagers in the ghetto, and I don't think she ever got over it. Don't tell her husband." Like inappropriate things. And he was in shock, right? Because he had expected him to be like a survivor. And I think adding, I mean, everything feels sacred and profane, but I think we do a disservice to not just a Holocaust memory, but to the survivors still alive today when we treat them as these sort of like superhero beings whose stories don't exist on a human plane.
Totally. I think that's definitely true. And actually, I don't even think about it so much as like the profane, but just the mundane. Like
Yeah,
these are things that they're not good or bad, but they're part of life. Everybody, needs to do certain things, can joke at times, whatever. And I think that you just portray that wonderfully. Um, Also, I wanted to ask on a related note, I love how the idea of performance runs through the story. And you have that, obviously, Sammy is a drag queen, so that's sort of built in. And you think about that But then there's also this element of performance that goes into this Holocaust remembrance. And we get it a little bit with Sammy's grandmother, and also just how this exhibit, well intentioned as it might be, really turns these survivors into spectacle. Um, and I wonder if you could talk about that. And I guess one thing that I started to wonder is, like, is it possible to do Holocaust remembrance in a way, especially as we move further and further away from the Holocaust itself, in a way that's not spectacle, that doesn't turn into this kind of theater?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to put a pin in that part of it, but remind me if I don't get to it. The performance stuff. Um, I'll start with it in Germany. We often think of Germany as like having dealt with its memory, right? It's unlike other countries that participate in the Holocaust, unlike other countries that have murdered Jews or committed other genocides. Germany has dealt with it. And there's an idea called about German memory culture called the theater of memory that the sociologist Michael Bodemann put forth. Max Czolik, who's a German Jewish writer, writes about it a lot. His book De-integrate just came out in English, um, where it's the idea that for Germany to for memory culture to be successful, we both need Jews to be seen like living in Germany today and happy, and the apology to have been accepted. And so the Jew has a role to play in modern Germany, is sort of their argument. And that when a Jew defies that role, it messes up the whole system. So for example, like Jews make up less than 1% of the German population today. But in the last few years, almost 30% of the people canceled by state-funded institutions for alleged anti-Semitism have been Jews, right? Not the ones making the accusations, the ones who've been canceled by the institutions, Jews, which basically comes down to these were Jews who were critical of Israel. And Germany, to uphold its image as we have fought through our wrongs, we have atoned, doesn't know what to do when a Jew doesn't fit the mold that the role that has been created. That's sort of the argument. Sebald, the German writer who died like 20 years ago, said it's actually a lack of memory we have. We move through it so efficiently that we can sort of pat ourselves on the back. So that's a big part of the performance. Drag, obviously, it's performing gender. But I think what's really one of the things that's wonderful about drag is it's often about expressing something true through something that's obviously false. And then you have Sammy, this character, who's always trying on different personas. He's very young. He doesn't quite know who he is. Um, he's uncomfortable as the youngest performer there. He's uncomfortable as a Jew, as the only Jew. He's uncomfortable as an American. He's uncomfortable because he's wealthier or comes from a wealthier family and doesn't need, this is not his full life. He doesn't need to be there. He can go home to the US. He can go back to university. He can pick up his very comfortable life where he left it. And so I think they're all, I don't know, I was interested in like all these different ways of performing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Adam. I really think that that's fascinating. And I mean, as you know, and others probably do not know, I lived in Germany for a year and a half, and I find that the way that you also describe um, Sammy's conflicted feelings about being Jewish in Germany, sort of wanting to put it like not have it be addressed, but then simultaneously feeling like it, that I think the line is that something is owed to him, that he's entitled in some way, um, was, I hate to admit it, but spot on, and just in all of its messiness, fascinating. Could you talk more about that, and maybe also your own experiences or friends' experiences of being a Jew in Germany or Poland?
Yeah. I uh I'll start with the possessiveness thing. There is something I feel it. I live in Poland, but I feel it more in Germany. of like, oh, I'm owed something here. I have a right to be here. I can behave however I want. And it's not a nice feeling. I think another part of it is that Jews from the US who are largely part of the dominant culture, who are, considered white in the US, come to Germany, come to Poland, come to Latvia or Lithuania, and they get to say, oh, nothing that has happened to you is as bad as what's happened to my family here. And we get to be, and it's an ugly feeling, right? It is sort of like it's not a kind feeling, but it's we get to say, oh, we get to be the ones who suffered. Even if the even if you don't have family from there, or even if your family left before the Holocaust, we still get to say, oh, our people suffered here. And I think that's a kind of like extraordinary thing, because it's aspiring to a hurt, and to be able to express that hurt. Um, I also think Jews, at least in Poland, I get a lot of like, oh my God, there's a whole section in the story of people flirting with Sammy because he's Jewish. And I get a lot of like, oh my God, you're Jewish. Like, can you write my name in Hebrew? Let's go to this bar. It used to be a synagogue. It's very cool. Like things like that. And I know it's the case in Germany as well. Yeah, there's a lot of people have written about it. There's been to Cholek and Boneman. Eliza Levinson has a brilliant piece on Germany's anti-Semitism commissions. I know it's an endlessly fascinating topic. I think I kind of answered the question. Did I stray away from it?
Yes, no, that was absolutely perfect. Um,
Oh, so actually, one thought I had
yes,
too
please.
about it is that, and you see it a lot in like writing from third gen, Jews, like people whose grandparents were survivors of, especially when they do a trip like this, or when they live in Poland or live in Germany, in addition to the like my family suffered here, it's trying to like make ourselves the protagonists of our grandparents' stories. And I was really interested in that here because I think it's an impulse that makes sense, but it's ridiculous. And
Right.
Sammy in the story, even as he's like, oh, I was dragged along to this like Holocaust exhibition, is constantly bringing up in narration what his grandparents went through,
Yes.
and how he's like, and look, he's like, don't you get it? Don't you? And he keeps, and when it's finally his turn to speak to the hologram, he tries to be like, I'm not like one of these tourists. I'm like you, basically, which I think is just a wild, wild impulse, but one that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I think that you do also such a good job of depicting how all the different nuances of that feeling, which, as you say, like it's not all nice. A lot of this feeling is you don't really want to think about it, but you do such a beautiful job of portraying all of those different how all of those different impulses are kind of working at the same time. Um, I do want to leave some time for questions, and I know that Carol and Josh have questions too. So everyone, please continue. I already see some questions. Please continue to write your questions in the chat. Um, Before I turn over to Carol and Josh, I just have one last question for you, Adam, which is that I know that this story is also a section, a part of your novel in progress. And I would love to hear more about the novel and how this section fits in.
Sure. This is yeah, the novel is about three generations of a family descended from survivors, across like the last few decades. This section came about because there's one whole long, long chapter with Sammy with this character, and this section came about because like 2018, the writer Justin Torres was putting together like a flash fiction on queer theme, or like a queer flash fiction issue of a magazine. And a former teacher of mine like forwarded me the message saying, "Do you have anything?" And I did not. And it was due in like 2 days. So I wrote something. I wrote like a version of this story in like a day or 2 days, much, much worse and very short. And he did not like it. But then I just like had it on my computer, and now it's here. So it's become part of the longer Sammy chapter.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, now I'd like to hand it off to Carol and Josh. Um, Carol, would you like to? start. Oh, and Carol, you are muted. I'm just gonna.
Unmute. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Hi, Adam, you've just told us about your novel in progress. I'd love to hear about your work in film, which Becca mentioned and uh, made me curious.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, I'm writing and producing a documentary with the director Michel Franco, who's a Mexican Jewish director who's only done fiction films before, and his first documentary about the politics of memory around World War II and the Holocaust. Basically, like how different groups take the same history and craft their own narratives out of it. So you have like the right wing in Polish, or like the far right, has this narrative of like no one has suffered more than we have, and too much is focused on the Jews, and they'll take a story, they'll often take factual events. Like sometimes they'll change things, but they'll often take the same facts that someone who disagrees would agree. These are the facts, and espouse a narrative of like, why, like essentially the Polish version of Make America Great Again. And then you have the left in Poland and in Germany that, as I mentioned, like the fetishism will be taking a lot of the same history and making a narrative out of it. And then you have like Jewish groups that from around the world that come to uh, uh, Poland and almost exclusively see the death camps, right? They do like Auschwitz and Majdanek and Treblinka, and then like a forest where people were killed, and like really, and that's kind of it. And then they go to Israel, where they swim in the Dead Sea and they party and they like celebrate things, and it's like Israel is this place of life and Poland was the place of death. And so the movie's about, I went on for much longer. I could have just said politics of
Oh,
memory,
it's
but it's about
interesting.
how we take all, the shared history, the Holocaust, World War II, and use it and invoke it to come to sort. I mean, it's very, yeah, it's very timely if anyone's seen Zone of Interest too, where when it briefly jumps into the future, I was like, oh, that's the space we're working in, of how the sites look today, how the sites are treated, what they've come to mean.
It sounds fascinating. Do you have a title?
Uh, I do, but but we disagree about the title. Yeah, the title is New Mistakes. If I get my way, it will not be called that when it comes out. So right now it's called New Mistakes, but but I'm looking for a different one if anyone has.
One follow-up question. Just do you address at all the issue of inherited trauma
In
that is
the
so front and center for third gen?
Yeah, in the documentary, oh, there's a few interviews with third gen Poles who've had an interesting thing of some in a lot of cases not knowing they were Jewish for like the first 10 or 15 years of their lives, and yet having these like tradition, or like having this sort of like sometimes just having an anxiety. I see there's one or two on the call, having like an anxiety around certain things, but figuring it out. Like, so we have a few of that in briefly, yeah, in the documentary, a few people speak to that, but from Poland, and then in the book, yeah, that's the main. That's I guess one of the things that's really explored, is both what does it mean to have inherited this thing, and also how is it maybe invoked beyond, how is it maybe invoked beyond what it was, if I can say it like that, beyond the thing itself.
Got it. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your work in both
Thanks.
media.
Thanks.
Josh.
Yes, Adam. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this amazing story. As the fiction editor of Paper Brigade, I have a question for you. But one of the things that people often ask in these forums is, what is it that drew us to this story? And so, if I could just say quickly, We get about 150 submissions in our brief open short story period every year. We print maybe 2 to 3 stories. So we're really looking for something that stands out. And I think with your story, there's so much stands out. The prose is just beautiful. The section that you read is one of those that I have marked describing the hologram in just such a vivid and shocking way, actually. There is sort of this notion of electricity there. And just the way you take us into a world that maybe not many readers are familiar with, from Berlin to this world of drag queens and tucking, the technology of holograms in terms of preserving memory. It all felt so new to us when we encountered the story, and beautifully rendered. And this gets to my question, and that is that when we meet Sammy in this story, he seems to be really struggling with not only his own history, his inherited history, the stories that his grandmother told him, but also his present. And very specifically, this question of what is real and what is make-believe, right? The story interrogates this so beautifully. One of the women asks the hologram, "Are you real?" in the piece that you read. And he says, "I am a real person." There's this beautiful notion about Vulva, one of the friends who had been Daniel. And the story says that Vulva succeeded in making the make-believe real. The performance became the thing itself. And I think this question of real versus make-believe sort of hovers throughout the story. And it made me think about sort of that notion of art and fiction itself, right? And I'm wondering if you think what the story says to you as the author about this sort of dichotomy between the real and the make-believe, but also just in terms of art itself. Does successful art somehow have to succeed the way Vulva succeeds in making the make-believe real, if that makes sense?
Okay, this is a big question. The thing that I thought of that might be an answer is I was obsessed with this when I was living in Krakow. Less about art, but in terms of what does it mean for something to be authentic? What does it mean for something to be real? And so I would go every day to a coffee shop where I would pass through maybe 20 tour groups, just in a 10-minute walk, 15-minute walk, to sit at the coffee shop I liked. And I would pass through the square that used to be one of the centers of Jewish life in Krakow, but is filled with tour groups because it's the square where they shot one of the deportation scenes in Schindler's List. It did not take place there. It took place on the other side of the river. It is filled with Jewish restaurants, or like Jewish themed restaurants, none of which are run by Jews, but they'll say, and some of which are like, we have a Jewish Philadelphia cheesesteak. We have a Jewish, like, it was like bizarre, and klezmer music that was really Fiddler on the Roof soundtrack, like completely bonkers. And yet it really was a 16th, 15th century street that you're walking on. I would sit in this coffee shop across from the synagogue where my grandfather was bar mitzvahed. That's a 16th century synagogue, and it really is. But the tone of the city was like, come look at our 16th century synagogue. Come look at our Jewish square. And it made it feel deranged to me. It made it feel fake. And in Auschwitz, if you've visited the camp today, one of the things that we include in the documentary, it's one of my obsessions, is that Auschwitz takes a ton of work to maintain. So that means that every year or two, all of the barbed wire is replaced, because you can't visit Auschwitz without seeing the barbed wire, right? We expect the barbed wire. We have to have the barbed wire. So the barbed wire. So one, it's insane that there's a factory in Poland or Europe still producing barbed wire for Auschwitz, just as a phenomenal thing to note. and that it's barbed wire today on prisons, right? Is razor wire. It's different. So they're like making the old-timey barbed wire for Auschwitz today, purely because it needs to look like that, because that's what people expect to see. Or the sign when you walk in that says Arbeit macht frei was stolen like 12 years ago. And though it was recovered, it had been cut into 3 parts. And rather than risk putting it up, they have it in storage, and they made a new sign that says Arbeit macht frei, which was made, so like a dozen years ago. And every day, not exaggerating, thousands of people take photographs of that sign. And I guess this is one of the questions that I'm most interested in art, in fiction, is if everyone is saying this is the sign, if we're all coming here to take photos, if what they're after in taking a photo is the feeling of, I have been to this place, I have been to this horrifying place, or this, we can take a photo of the Eiffel Tower too, but like, I have been to this place. It's not about this is gonna be the best photo, but I have been here. Even if the thing is not real, is it producing the feeling? Is that enough? Basically, the short version is I don't have a good answer for you. But I'm very interested in art and in fiction that take on these questions of what value there is in things being real, or when do we, or particularly when you get to a space where you're not sure. The transition question you brought up about one of the characters who transitions into vulva is a friend of mine who's a drag performer used to say, here's my name. I'm not going to give their actual name, but here's my name. It was a male name, and then I performed drag as so-and-so, and then became so-and-so in her life. And her transition wasn't, I'm going to find another name. It's like, oh, it's the drag persona. And I talk about it with her a little bit of like, but when she's on stage, she's still performing drag. That's still the fake part. And so in her everyday life, even though she's taken on that name, that's real. And I know, and I think, anyway, it's I don't have a good answer, but these are clearly things I'm thinking about.
No, I think that's a terrific. I really appreciate that answer. Thanks, Adam, for helping us think about that today. And there's so many questions in the chat. Becca, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And yes, Adam, I thought that was a great answer. And there's so many different fascinating things to think about with that. I see that Miri has also added to the chat, that there was a whole conversation in the 90s about what to do with the wood at Birkenau that's deteriorating, whether to replace it. I know that the former concentration camp where I volunteered for a year, that's now a memorial, they also made it sort of went a different way, where there had been buildings that had been taken down sort of in the afterlife of the concentration camp. Like it had become a prison actually for part of the time, and different things had happened there. And instead of rebuilding these wooden barracks, they had sort of built these sort of stone, like almost like a stone sculpture, but it wasn't really a sculpture. It was just like piles of stone, sort of like where they once stood, so that you could see, and it wasn't forgotten, but that it wasn't trying to rebuild something that was, that had naturally kind of over the course of history disappeared. So I just think it's absolutely fascinating. Obviously, I could talk way longer about this. We're already over time. However, I do want to get to some of the great audience questions as well. So I think we'll just stay on for another 5 minutes or so to get through these ones. Eliza, thank you so much. I believe you were also mentioned earlier in this discussion. But that is, yes, that is really interesting. Yeah, there's been, I know that there's been like different concentration camps that have turned to, like, one of them was like a restaurant for a certain amount of time. The place where I worked was, honestly, it's beautiful, and it's in a very like near a very quaint village. If you just went there, you'd think, oh, this is a lovely place. And so Eliza is asking you, Adam,
Yeah.
so the alternative to this kind of artificial reconstruction is a Polish concentration camp, like, I'm not trying to pronounce this actually.
Płaszów. It's actually, so it's in the city of Krakow. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. Do you want me to?
No. Well, I read the rest of her question.
Okay.
It went unmarked and was used as a regular park for many years until recently, although it's still a recreational park, albeit with several large signs. Where do we find ourselves in this schema?
I have news for you, Eliza. They have started building a museum there. I'm actually pretty frustrated about it. Okay, so Płaszów, for those who don't know, is a concentration camp in Krakow. It's the camp in Schindler's List. If you've seen Schindler's List. To get back to the real versus fake, they didn't shoot there because modern buildings were visible. So they shot the concentration camp scenes in Schindler's List in a neighboring labor camp that was mostly for non-Jewish Polish prisoners, but actually a camp still. And then they left the set behind, which is completely insane. So there's matzavot, like Jewish headstones in the ground with repeating names because they were all made from the same. Completely crazy, completely a crazy thing to do. Barbed wire, everything, and they just left it. Separate conversation, but another great example of what's real here. Płaszów now, as a park, it was one of these sort of places of non-memory because people would walk their dogs, people would have barbecues, etc., go on dates, and I was involved with like a initiative to sort of educate the public about what was there and learn the history of the camp and worked with the professors who put up these signs. But now they're turning it into a museum, and so they've cut down something like 300 trees to make the parking space for the museum. They've put paths all over the camp, some of which have steps, like stairs. So formerly this was a place that was sloped and that, yes, it would be hard to navigate in a wheelchair, but if you had mobility issues, you could still make it around. And now it's become less accessible. Families nearby go on walks there. Kids are in strollers. I sort of admired this sort of, when it was this interim space of, yeah, I know a lot of people visiting, especially Jews from the US, found it very disrespectful that people were just walking there as if without a care in the world. But it was a way of taking a horrible history and making it something that you live with every day. And you walk through it, and some days you read the signs, some days you don't. And by being in sort of this liminal space between site of memory and recreational, and park, it actually, I think, provided a space for more reflection and conversation than some of the more visited or built up or tour-based camps. That kind of covers it. Can I pick a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Of course, if you have to leave, please leave. But
No. Yes, this is true. But yes, this is perfect. Adam, pick the last question.
The last question. Oh, Jesus.
Sorry, not to add extra pressure.
I'm gonna do a little. I'm gonna run down a couple. I'm just gonna
Okay.
boom. Is that cool?
All right, let's do it.
So Mark Cohen says, why include the side story of the main character having to pee and how he ties down his pants, ties down his penis, tucks, as Josh said. I would say that to him, that's the main story. And the holograms and the Holocaust thing is the side story that he's trying to ignore. And the main story is that he has to pee. And I include it because all of the levels of performance therein, but also that I was interested in someone sort of not engaging with the big thing in front of him and just we focus on our own things. Do you find today's climate, editors and literary world in general, open to literature with Jewish or Israeli themes? I can't really speak to Israeli themes, although I think there is a lot of writing about Israel and Palestine that is phenomenal and is being discussed all over. I haven't had any trouble writing about Jewish things. And last one, I was really drawn to the scenes in which the hologram can't answer the audience's questions. What might this say about the limits of memory? This is just what the hologram does. I saw it for the first time in LA, and I was with a curator, at the Holocaust Museum LA, and she shocked me by just turning to the hologram and saying, Renee, do you remember a dead baby in Auschwitz? And I was like, what? And the hologram goes, I'm sorry, I do not understand the question. And she's saying to me, the curator is like, oh, we heard that she had this really moving story about a dead infant in Auschwitz. And we're all trying to figure out what the key word is, because it's like Siri, where you have to like use the right word to get the right response. So she spent like 10 minutes being like, all right, like, interrupting her and saying, yeah, but Renee, like a child concentration camp, infant mortality, like bizarre, it was a bizarre thing. And Renee kept going, the survivor, who was 90, still with us, but recorded, saying, maybe ask again, or I don't remember that happening, or maybe you could ask someone, like as if a robot was speaking. And so yeah, it was just, it felt like the reality was being pulled out from under me. Yeah, I've gone on for a very long time, but um, thank you. I don't
Adam,
know if there's any others that I missed. Oh, yeah.
no, I think that is perfect. Adam, that was incredible. I feel like I could ask you a million more questions just myself. And this was just obviously absolutely fascinating to everyone here. Thank you so much. Thank you again, everyone, for coming today. If you'd enjoyed this conversation and you'd like to read more about Paper Brigade, we're posting the link to purchase the current issue again and the discount code again too. I'd also like to encourage you to support us by becoming a JBC member. Our mission here at JBC is to build community through Jewish literature. We're a small nonprofit, and support from readers like you is a crucial part of our initiatives. This is the final meeting of our short story club this season, but JBC still has a bunch of events coming up this spring, and you can find all of the details on our events page, which we're posting a link to in the chat as well. So I hope to see you all next year, if not before. Adam, thank you again. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you being here. Bye. And thanks, JBC, for doing this.